This is so universal. Everybody makes an excuse at the end as to why they didn't post or why they didn't start the thing they really wanted to start. Welcome to Self-Funded with Spencer, sponsored by Pareto Health, ClaimDoc, and PlanSight. Whether we're discussing innovative new healthcare strategies, exposing hidden revenue streams or misaligned incentives, or even just cheering on the next generation of this industry, we promise you that you're going to learn something. So thank you for joining us for another great conversation about the future of healthcare. About 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago now, I never made a post on social media like ever. Like didn't do video posts, didn't do picture posts. Occasionally might post something silly on Twitter, but it was nothing related to actual content creation that you might perceive me to do today. And I literally was like an anonymous Amwin stop loss wholesale rep. So outside of the people that knew me in my close network of brokers, I didn't do anything publicly. And so that reason I tell you that guys, or this to start, is that some of you maybe are in the same position right now, have never made a post, and it might seem terrifying to use social media for your job. And so I want you to know that 4 or 5 years ago, that was exactly the position I was in. And the stuff that we've built over the last 4 or 5 years have all been in that time span. And so even if you guys have never done it, chances are you can benefit right away from doing so. And so I'll walk you through some of those best practices. But I want to tell you the story of how it started, just so you can get a sense of where it came from. So some of you might have watched these videos. I suspect a lot of you guys probably in this room have. But that was the very first video I'd ever made and posted on social media. That was June or July of 2020. The reason I did it is we all know, obviously, the lockdowns and COVID that we experienced. It was hard as salespeople to get in front of an audience. Zoom wasn't very common at that point. We were all hopping on Zooms all day. And so I go, well, what if I use content as a way to sort of establish myself as an expert, showcase what I know, and hopefully that from a sales perspective might generate some interest. That video, again, not knowing what I was doing, iPhone, had no idea, lighting, framing, the camera's too close, all this crap that I made mistakes on. That video trended 3 times on LinkedIn and like the top 1% of all LinkedIn, the whole platform. I got notifications 3 separate times in a week that it was in the top 1%. So what's the point? The point is somebody that has no idea what they're doing on a very niche subject like stop loss insurance could actually have success in social media. And so that started this journey, if you will, that I was on. But it reinforced that you can find an audience for things that you think nobody cares about. We are all relative, if not absolute experts on subjects like captives and self-insurance. And there actually is a really big audience for what you know that exists out there, okay? But then you started to extend to things like a podcast. It started to extend, and I'm going to cover like what you guys can do in this world. Using humor, we'll cover that as well. And then even memes and things like that can be effective on social media. So you might say, well, that's cool. We've seen what you've done, watched the podcast, etc. But like, what about me? Where do I start? I've never made a post before. And so what I'll do is walk you through some of those first steps, some of the easiest steps to have a really low barrier to entry, and then over time you can determine how far do I want to take this. The overarching theme though, guys, is this stuff will benefit you as a salesperson. It'll benefit you in your career, and this absolutely should be a tool that you're wielding in the marketplace beyond all the stuff that you're already doing. You're working your butts off. This is a way to exponentially increase the awareness of you as a salesperson and an authority on the subject. It'll help you establish credibility, all of that stuff that you're seeking in your sales roles. Social media can be a tool that I want you guys to consider using. So where would you start, right? So like maybe you're terrified of video. Maybe you're terrified of posting a picture of yourself or whatever. That's cool. Maybe you don't even want to post your own thoughts. I would start, and the very easiest thing you could do today is comment on other people's posts. Add some actual value to what the original post was about. Give your perspective or your opinion, but seek to actually provide real value in your commentary. And what that's going to do is that's going to start pushing you into their network. They may not even know who you are at that point. But what it's going to do is establish yourself in their mind as an credible authority on that subject. They probably will connect with you afterwards proactively rather than you connecting with them. And it's also going to push you out into their extended network of people as well. So if they have 1,000 followers and it's a different network than yours, you comment on their post, it gets a couple likes and some interaction. Now you're pushed within their network as well, and you'll likely have other people by extension that want to connect with you too. And so this is an easy way. You could spend literally 20 minutes a morning Just commenting on posts of people that you either have respect for or would like to get in front of, or both. And that will be a really good way to start. So I would definitely start there. Maybe take a step back, and if you don't have a LinkedIn profile page, go create one. Certainly make sure you have your picture, your about me filled out, your resume, etc. I feel like that's like common knowledge. But if you don't do that, that would be your first order of homework, is to go set up a profile. From there, you might start going, well, what if I just wrote one post a week? Or I wrote one article a week? Spend 20 or 30 minutes jotting down notes on your iPhone when you're sitting and watching Netflix or you're having your coffee in the morning. That's how I kind of start to draft ideas, and then I'll find the ones that I think are worthy of like actually constructing, and I'll iterate from there before it becomes a post. But the reason I'm stair-stepping you into, you don't have to have your own podcast, is kind of my point. You could simply just start posting on other people's posts, or start writing articles, or start writing posts about things you care about. And so maybe you want to establish in people's minds the positioning of captives. And so you might pick 10 categories that are important around captives. For once a week, for 10 weeks, you know how something to write about, and then you'll make, people start to follow along with your cadence. And so what you're doing at the end of the day is try to create exponential awareness of who you are. And so one of my buddies, Andy Neary, came up with that term. What that means is, let's say, Jeremy, you make 100 cold calls a week. You might get 10 people on the phone, 2 people talk to you, you might get 1 meeting, right? That's a lot of effort. What if also you made 1 post a week that 1,000 people viewed or 5,000 people viewed? They're going to start coming into your network proactively and what I would call self-selecting into your ecosystem, because they've told you, they've signaled to you that they want to be there. And so now they already have a familiarity with you, they have rapport that they've probably built with you, and they're very likely going to come to you and say, Jeremy, I want to talk about captives. I've been meaning to have a conversation with somebody. You look like you know what you're talking about. Could we schedule a meeting? And so I would do that, and in addition to all your other cold outreach that you're probably doing, but this is going to get you in front of a lot more people, and it's a lot lower effort by comparison to making 100 phone calls. All right, so use a picture to drive the message. What do I mean by that? Yes, you could have a post about captives, but I usually like to use some sort of visual support in that post as well that gets people to stop scrolling. So I think on the next slide, I might have an example of that. So what I'll say is, like, find a picture that kind of supports the idea. So if you were going to post about your value system as a human being or what you think about a certain topic, find a family photo or a work photo that might visually support, even, tangentially support that message. The goal is to get them to stop scrolling and read your post. You will have to be an absolutely masterful writer to get people to stop and read if you don't have something visually on social media that gets them to stop. So I almost always, and I mean almost always, include some sort of visual. I think by example, I did an article about contract basis the other day. And anytime I post about stop loss, I usually have a notebook and I have a drawing or the title of that post written on a notebook so I can take a picture of it, and that picture can be the thing that I put on the post. You're just looking for something visually that engages people with your content, okay? And then from there, let's say you wanted to get really excited about this and you wanted to go appear on somebody else's podcast. My guess is, besides me, everybody in this room, you know somebody that does some sort of podcast in healthcare. Most of them are virtual, meaning you don't even have to leave your house in order to be a guest on that show. And what you get from that, you usually get 30, 45, 60 minutes of somebody asking you questions about your life, asking you questions about your expertise. You can now source footage from that. And so if you wanted to use an editor like Nathaniel, you could, or if you just wanted to share that podcast with your network once it comes out, now people have a visual representation of who you are and what you stand for, and somebody else is the one that set it up, scheduled it, shot it, edited it, etc. All you had to do was show up. And so I typically like to say, if you're ready to kind of go full bore into this, getting on somebody else's show, just even raising your hand and saying, hey, I would love to be a guest if some point you're looking for somebody to talk about this, this, and this. Just get on their show, raise your hand. People are always looking for guests because it's hard to get people scheduled. And so volunteering yourself to say you want to be on a show is a super easy thing to do. And then from there, we'll get into kind of the more detailed stuff later. The one thing I do want to address, that last bullet point, is to get personal with your posts. There is often a debate, is LinkedIn a professional platform or is it a personal platform or both? The old mentality I would say is, Facebook's for personal stuff, LinkedIn is for professional stuff only. The reality is anybody that wants to do business with you wants to know who you are as well and generally wants to know, and trust you before they ever do business with you. And I would say what better way to get them to do that than to share something about you, your life, your career, your family. And so I use this post right here. This is actual real story. That's my son. We had to take him to urgent care overnight. Actually, it was the ER because urgent cares were closed. And we get a $4,200 bill as a result of that 1.5 hour stay in a nebulizer. So I got a firsthand experience of our broken healthcare system getting a really big, egregious bill after the fact. And so I thought, why don't I just share this experience? And so my hook, if you will, is the exact dollar amount of the bill after, negotiated down. And I said, that's how much Cook Children's charged us for this event. That post is probably the most viral post I've ever had because it struck a chord. It was relatable. The picture of me and my son got people to stop. The dollar amount being very specific was a nice hook. And then all of a sudden, it just generated a flood of people going, I had this happen to me too. Mine was 50,000, mine was 40,000. People were offering to help. I got connected with a company called Goodbill. I met their founders. They helped lower that bill like $800 or $900 as a result of their services. So using a real personal story that's relatable is really powerful. And so that is why I think sharing personal stories to a degree that you're comfortable, not all the time, don't post about your food every single day, things like that. That's Instagram. But you can share personal things that whether or not they relate to your career or what you do doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I think I had a couple hundred people that added me as a result of that, got some new people within my network that are really, really good people. And I think what it did was just give me firsthand experience that I could share with other people about the brokenness of the system that they could relate to. Okay, so then that begs the question, what don't you do? The very first thing I would say don't do is don't go buy a bunch of equipment. Don't spend thousands of dollars on a camera you don't know how to use. Don't go buy a $500 microphone. None of that's necessary. Your iPhone is perfect. These were I think were $150 on Amazon if you wanted to get something like this as a mic. Don't need that either. Just get a place where you maybe have a tripod, a desk tripod or a regular tripod that holds an iPhone. Get a ring light for $25 on Amazon. Set yourself up with a nice background if you want to do video, and that's literally all you want to do. I've seen so many people think they're going to be like a huge podcaster, and so they'll spend $5,000 on a camera and audio equipment, shoot 3 episodes and quit, and now they have equipment that they can't use. That's unnecessary. Don't try to be perfect, man. I mean, I showed you how imperfect that first video was. I can tell you every single video we've ever released has some imperfection to a degree, and that just is what it is. None of us have $10 million budgets to do a big movie. So shoot imperfections. Shoot bad lighting every once in a while. Include the ums and ahs. I mean, this is us as human beings speaking. We're all obviously fallible. And so if you try to let perfection be the standard, you'll probably never actually release a piece of content ever. And that defeats the purpose, okay? And I think people want to see the human side of us as much as possible. So I would actually look to include imperfections because they're more relatable than not. For sure. This is so universal. Everybody makes an excuse at the end as to why they didn't post or why they didn't start the thing they really wanted to start. I mean, I got to give Kristen a bunch of credit. Coming down to the podcast, coming down later and shooting some extra content. She got beyond the making excuses really quickly, and then she started to see, I think, the power of doing that stuff. And so most people end up at that very last step and never do it. I have conversations from time to time that people want my advice on starting a podcast, and I will always tell them that unless you do this, none of this matters, right? So we can talk for 30 minutes. My guess is there will be an excuse at the very end and you don't start. I mean, I'll tell them that because that's the reality. That's 95% of people. And last but not least is don't give up too soon. Kristen's had a lot of success pretty early on with the proliferation of some of her content, but that's not normal. Most people start posting and they post into the ether and nobody responds or replies and they get really bummed and then they quit. I could tell you nobody listened to my podcast at first, like nobody. And slowly but surely we built an audience of over 3+ years. But if you were worried about how many likes and comments and views and you had some artificial standard that you were trying to hit, all that stuff is outside of your control. And so if you use that as your barometer of success, you're going to give up before you ever get started. Well, so then the next question is, guys, is it worth it? Is this worth the effort? I mean, of course, I would say, in my biased opinion, it's 100% worth it. And my career has changed immensely as a result of those efforts. But I can give you some like specific reasons why it may be worth it for you. And the first is the credibility component. I'll give you a good story. About 3 years ago, I was selling for PlanSight, which is a software company. I was the only salesperson. I had a meeting in person with a broker in Kansas City, a guy I knew from previous life. Agree to the meeting. I walk in, a young producer's in that room, and he goes, "Holy shit, are you the guy that does the podcast?" I'm not joking. And then he got like really, it was almost like fanboy-esque, but like in a really, really nice way. But I was like, yeah. And so that started a conversation. I had credibility the second I walked in the door. That guy had already been convinced that whatever I was going to tell him, he was likely going to buy. And no joke, before we landed the plane on the way home, we had a contract signed by that agency. And I strongly believe part of that was the credibility that was derived from him knowing who I was when I walked in the door. Yeah, and whether or not, yes, all this stuff has sort of happened. We put effort into it now, and it's a part of the business, and, we fund it, it's kind of expensive, all that stuff. But I didn't plan for that to happen. And so I have no idea what's going to happen for any one of you guys in this room. But I do know if you're consistent enough that you absolutely receive benefit as a result of those efforts. Where it goes from there kind of depends on you and how much you want to pour into it. The credibility thing, especially as a salesperson, we mentioned exponential awareness. I touched earlier, Jeremy, I used in the example of cold calling, right? That effort is elbow grease. That's pure effort. One call equals one potential prospect. When you release a video, I showed you those stop loss videos. To this day, people still tell me they share them and people watch them. I think we have 100,000+ views on all those stop loss videos. I shot it one time. It's still working for me 4 years later. It's still serving a purpose. And so you can make one amount of effort and turn that into perpetual potential benefit. Or you can do the hard stuff too, which is fine. And I would argue that you should do both. But I think people forget the fact that once a video is out there, as long as you never delete it, it's always accessible and it's always shareable after that. Oh, I was just going to say who to follow. If you're not following these 3 people, I would strongly recommend you do. They just 3 happen to be male. I would also look at Emma Fox, Tiffany Ryder, Kimberly Carlson. If you want to jot down these names, I can give you 25 people to follow. The reason why you would want to follow these are all folks in our industry, is you can just watch from afar. How does Chris speak about this? How does Sim speak about, actuarial science? He's not even an actuary. The guy's really more of a personality, but he's done an amazing job of building a big following as a salesperson. You can watch all of their styles and see what they do, and you can figure this thing out without ever having to pay anybody to coach you through it. Chances are a coach is going to speed up your process, but I actually learned by watching Andy Neary from afar and just applied the things that he talks about on a daily basis. I just did it. And so I would recommend you find some folks in the industry to start following, especially if you want to just do that very first step of commenting on their posts. Start commenting on people's posts that you want to be connected with, and chances are they're going to connect with you instead of the other way around.